one of the smartest guys in, one of the smartest people, one of the people I keep a close eye on just to make sure my head is going in the right direction. Dan is a really important figure in the Canadian economy, so I'm happy to be doing this with him today. Dan, we did something like this 2 years ago, right? Not much has happened in the last 2 years. We could start anywhere, but to keep Gary happy, let's start with the subject of this conversation, banking license, what goes into getting one of those things. You and I are both fans of The Obstacle is a Way, or The Obstacle is a Way, a book about sort of Stoic philosophy and how you can apply that to everyday life. But I think we had different takes on it, because my takeaway from The Obstacle is a Way is you don't cower in the front of obstacles, you find ways to get through them, get around them. You clearly decided that you need to put an obstacle in your way because you decided to grow by becoming a Schedule I bank in Canada. Why? Tell us what the thinking was behind going there, because some of your peers have clearly decided to take a different strategy into breaking into the Canadian banking business, but you're taking the hard way. Tell us why you did it.
For better or worse. So maybe just quickly, for those that aren't familiar with KOHO, we launched in 2017. We have raised on the order of $400 million, give or take at this point, 2 million accounts. We offer folks like a day-to-day, let's call it a bank account. We're not allowed to call it a bank account because of this, which we'll come to. But we offer high interest rates. I don't want to make this a pitch, but it's a bank account designed for like everyday Canadians. The reason maybe it's just relevant for this group, the reason I started this business, and I think it matters for the bank license, is because hopefully the through line of my career is just to be useful at scale. I had sold a business in wind energy, came into capital for the first time in my life, and I started asking, what do people do with money? I had no financial education, and what I realized is that these are enormously asymmetric decisions, meaning it takes just as much work to get into great financial products as it does shit ones. And if you are in not good ones, you will retire with 30 to 50% less wealth. That's a fact. It's also a fact that the majority of Canadians are in not good ones, many people in this room. And you can pick kind of any financial vertical you want, and it is not optimized for the best outcomes for the individual. And the way that I think about this is whatever a life of agency is to somebody, it is very difficult to have agency if you don't have financial stability. Impossible in many respects. And so if you don't have financial stability as a result of just being in the wrong financial products, that's like not a good outcome and a worthwhile attempt at solving that problem. Okay, so fast forward to today, and so we are now in late phase 2 of getting a bank license, which means we've been at it for 4+ years. There's a few reasons to get a bank license, but if you actually just take like the long-term view, fundamentally we want to control our inventory. As a bank, our inventory is money. And if you actually think about kind of like the fundamental, I think people, the innovation of tech, what tech ultimately brings to everything is like lower cost. That is kind of the ground truth of that. And then if you have lower cost, you can either charge more or have a higher margin or, okay? And if you put us up side by side to a bank, and we can talk about the banks in Canada because there are some wonderful storied institutions, but our cost to acquire is like a third. The cost to serve is on the order of a tenth less. I think we're doing interesting things in risk and underwriting, so our cost of risk is roughly the same, but our cost of capital is like 4x what the banks are, right? And so if you're going to compete across all of these dimensions, I think, we have 220 employees today, and we serve 2 million Canadians. I think we could serve 10 million Canadians with like 250 employees, right? And so what that means is you get to this place where you get to control your cost of capital, you get to control your costs, and then hopefully that means you get to build a better product, and then you get to translate that value back to users, and therefore you grow faster. And I think it's going to be like, so theoretically we'll have equivalent cost of capital to a bank's, but we will have honestly 1/1000th of the cost structure. Like I think we can have 2 orders of magnitude lower costs, and I think that benefits better user costs or better user product. Now, the reason that Some of our peers have not gone and got a bank license because it's a lot of work. It turns out it's like really hard. And OSFI's been a really wonderful partner, but it's like Canada is a total outlier in terms of getting a bank license. Like 5 years would be a fast bank license in this country. In Europe, you can get these in 10 to 12 months. In the United States, there's like 8,000 banks. There's pros and cons to all of these things, but like Canada is a uniquely challenging model in which to go get a bank.
Why? Why does it take so long?
So for a long time, OSFI was, and the Department of Finance were purely incentivized to avoid systemic risk in this country. And so the best way to avoid systemic risk was to have 5 or 6 banks that you know and that can control. And what we got out of that was a monopoly. And so if you look at the Canadian banks and you say, and typically we have more conservative, but people often equate like our conservatism in capital ratios with competition, and they're actually completely distinct forces. And so people will say we came out of 2008 well because we have, but no, we came out of 2008 well because we have conservative capital ratios, which are a good thing. That's completely independent from how many banks we have and how well the economy functions and the competitive market functions. And so if you, OSFI, and to their credit, they have realized that this was an overcorrection, but there's a few, you can actually go look at this. There's a metric called the Lerner Index, which is a metric of market efficacy, and it's basically how well does the market move. And so in the cost of banks, interest rates go up and down, how well does the market adjust? Okay, Canada's like the worst I've ever seen in this Lerner Index. I've looked at 50, Argentina, Brazil, Russia, Mexico, you name it. Canada has the most market capture of any banking economy that I have seen. And I've probably looked at 50 countries in this regard. Another way to think about this is the Canadian banks have higher capital requirements. The return on equity of Canadian banks are typically 50% higher than US banks. And so you have to ask yourself, like, are we 50% smarter than JP Morgan Chase or Morgan Stanley? Probably not, right? It's market capture, and that market capture comes from somewhere. And it generally comes from fees and a lot of things that, so we've kind of like propped up this ecosystem. And I think the long-term story is, it is very easy to do a count of the market caps of the banks and all the people they employ and all the good things they've done in our communities and all that kind of stuff. It's very hard to do the math on a banking infrastructure which erodes 30 to 50% of your wealth over your life. Like, that is a much slower burn and a much more hard thing to do the calculus on, and nobody in Ottawa has been talking about it for a long time. I think we're getting better, but I think I think we honestly had blinders on as a country for like the last 25 years.
This system, is it by design then, in your view, or accidental? I mean, just how did that evolve?
I mean, I think it's, so from the lens of Ottawa, I don't think it's by design. But I do think that that's kind of I don't think it's by the design in the sense that it's malicious or like people are twisting their mustaches. I think you have a bunch of people in banks who are designed to maximize the value of their share, like they're doing their job of maximizing shareholder value.
Right.
And so from the bank's lens on this, they are very close with Ottawa and very close with the structures and frankly very close with regulatory capture. Like taking 5.5 years to get a bank license is regulatory capture. There's no reason it should take that long, particularly at our size and scale, right? And I think we as a fintech community and we as a builder community have not been grown-ups about also connecting with regulators, and we're getting better at this too, to say like, this is the impact, and this is what it means, and this is what it means when our peers get a bank license in 10 months and we have to wait 5.5. Like, to Revolut, which is the biggest kind of fintech in the world and a fantastic company, just to, they went from launching as a product in a company to like a payments license in 10 months, okay? At the time, I would probably in 2020, 2021, I would guess we were doing on the order of like 3 or 4 billion in GMV transaction volume a year. We would have 20 to 25% of people's first attempts to fund their KOHO account fail because we couldn't connect to any payments infrastructure. Like when we started, we were like manually clearing e-transfers, And so it's just like a fundamental, we make no excuses. It's the job of an entrepreneur to go figure these out and solve these problems. But it's like I think we have bad intuitions about that we are like an order of magnitude more conservative than a lot of countries in this respect.
Can we go to the day that you made the decision to launch down or to go down this path? I mean, I'm sure you got lots of advice that this is going to be a hard one, Dan. Don't do it. So what was the thought process on that moment where you said, no, we're gonna go for this license. We're going to apply.
I don't think it wasn't like a binary. It was, geez, it sure would be nice to control our cost of capital. And we can't, even today, we can't call ourselves a bank, despite that 2 million people use us for banking services and whatever. But I think it was like a continuum of people saying, here's all the downsides, and then I think like hopefully most good operators, you like go and pressure test those things. And the conversations we've had, I think OSFI's been great. I think their new leadership under Peter Rutledge is wonderful. They get it, you know. And so what we found is those pains have been overrated, and you can actually go do that stuff. But it was a continuum. We looked at buying 3 or 4 banks, and we went deep. And so we ran a dual track until maybe 12 months ago, when we just said, look, we're close enough that like, even if we were to go buy a bank, the Department of Finance would take too long to clear it end. So it was more like just and even today, we treat it as like a call option on a bank license, because if OSFI comes back tomorrow and they say, your CET ratios are going to be X, and then you're like, the return on equity suck, and it's not then we'll walk. You know what I mean? The nice thing about KOHO's business is we have a working consumer business that we don't have to do it. And so, which is different than most also historic OSFI applications where you'd go bank license, then user growth. We've gone user growth, then bank license.
I have a moderately technical question about why your cost of capital goes down if you have a license. Can you talk through that?
So when we're lending today, we've got our lending partners are here, they're CIM, they've been wonderful. What happens is we have to go to them and we say, here's our risk and here's the book and all that kind of stuff, and then they'll charge us, I won't say it because I'll get in trouble, but like they charge you a lot, they charge you like commensurate with the risk and all that kind of stuff, right? And so I'll make this number up, but if my cost of capital is 12 or 14%, and I have a $500 million lending book, right? I'm gonna pay $70 million in interest. If I can buy deposits at 4%, I get a lot more margin, and then I can either lower my cost to borrow, or I can keep more margin, or I can put that revenue back into R&D or whatever. And so, but in very rough math, you kind of cut your cost of capital into a third of what it is, you know? So yeah, that's the way the math works.
Okay. So this is where the former newspaper reporter tries to make some news. Do you have a sense on when you might have your license? Any way to benchmark that?
Yeah, we spent all last week in an offsite going through it. I'm highly confident we'll have it in 2026. I think we will. It's a bit more. This is to OSFI's credit, but it used to be kind of a very binary gated process of phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. I think notionally in that model, we would have like exited phase 2 at the end of this year. And I think we're broadly on track to do that. And then you basically go into phase 3, and phase 3 is those OSFI coming on site and saying, and actually looking at the processes and, you know, this is your risk credit model and how are you actually implementing it and all that, those kind of controls. That can take 3 months. If you're like really aggressive, it can take 6 or 9 months if you're not. So I definitely want to have them in 2026.
Okay. Politics in Ottawa has changed a lot since you started thinking about going for a bank license. When we now have a prime minister who talks openly about wanting to see more competition in financial services and gone from like a broad, competition's good, to actually a little more specific. Do you sense a change in the weather? Or are you, and even more than a sense, do you actually tangibly see a change?
So I think this class of leadership is much more competent. I think they are much more sincere in those kinds of things. It's hard to know if there's so many externalities that have happened to Canada, I'm sure we'll talk about some of them, that it's like pretty hard to pinpoint and normalize against any baseline. But I think the engagement is much more sincere and much more competent. But no, we have not seen structural change. I think there's evidence of some things that are counterproductive in that regard lately.
Like what?
I mean, this is. I think so. If we look at we can go a few different ways. But I think if we look at like AI as an example, if you want to build AI, and the team, Minister Solomon is great, and I think that they're very competent and they're very engaged. If you want to build sovereign AI in a country, which I generally think is a good idea, you have to be able to build the energy that will then inform the power capacity. I think Canada's power capacity over the next 10 years, last time I checked, was on the order of like 150 gigawatts, okay? China's building, not that we're China, but like China's building on the order of a terawatt every 3 years, okay? So it's like, and then you look at the energy and how many energy projects have actually gone through since the new government, and the hit rate's like not any better. And so it is both from an economic prosperity general model, and then from the idea of like building the actual energy, which is the raw materials of AI. I think that like, I was hoping that we would see more progress in terms of these things getting approved and greenlit and fast-tracked and I think like the batting average is not great. I think it's like 1 out of 13 of the last applications have been approved.
Okay.
You know?
Let's come back to that,
Yeah.
but and finish up. But first, let's finish off sort of the excuse me the financial policy
Sure.
conversation, for lack of a better way to frame it up. So, the head of OSFI, Peter Routledge, has sounded far more encouraging of late.
Yes.
Around introducing some competition
Yes.
than I'd heard him for a while. So do you think that's a direct change from a new attitude in Ottawa?
I think Peter's been on this talk track for a while. I think he now feels liberated in this regime. I think that the thing that, I'm not quoting Peter, but I think that he and I are philosophically aligned is like, for a long time, we had a bank policy structure of like 0 bank failures, okay? Any policy which relies on zeroism is inherently a brittle policy. And if you look at like Silicon Valley Bank failed. It should have failed. They were not marked, whatever. But like depositors were made whole and shareholders got wiped out. That's a market that works, right? And so like we can't have this policy of like 0 bank failures. We have to have and we have CDIC and CUDIC, like depositors should not take risk and shareholders should get wiped out. And like that is a very manageable place to be. And this idea of like contagion risk and bank run risk is just like no longer, it's like the scar tissue from the 30s, you know? It's just like not how federal governments operate when they can print money. And so I think Peter Routledge is like liberated under this current regime. And I think we are doing partially because of folks like Carolyn Rogers are doing a much better job of recognizing that without economic prosperity, like none of this really matters.
What's Carolyn done to help the?
As the governor of the Bank of Canada, like 2 years ago, she's like, we have a federal productivity emergency in this country, and she continues to be very vocal about that. That's out of characteristic for a head of, like the head of a Bank of Canada, you know. Yeah. And she does.
She put a name on it, right?
100%, and that's like we need more of that, you know. Yeah. It's awesome.
The new CEO of EQ Bank said earlier this morning that he feels like there's a tailwind on coming from Ottawa to make some policy changes to help with competition. The fight that all you guys have been engaged in for years now.
Yeah.
You agree with that? So you feel that too?
Yeah. I think you can. I think it's like pretty intellectually. I think if you're going to talk about the 0.5% GDP growth and all that kind of stuff that we have in Canada, and then look at our tendency towards monopolies, you have to start addressing one if you're going to be serious about making, like they're just by design inefficient market structures, right? And then it doesn't flow through to consumers and users and Canadians, frankly. So particularly when folks are feeling a lot of financial pressure in their lives.
Okay, I guess this is almost a habit, I guess, at this stage, but do I need to ask you a question about open banking? I mean, is there anything to say?
I mean, like an open banking swear jar.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Has it changed, or is it still
look, this is another thing where it's like, we've been talking about it for a decade. Like we are.
I feel guilty asking now.
No, it's fine. I don't, but I think we just need to be aware that like this is an order of magnitude slower than a lot of developed countries. And I think we're kind of, David Foster Wallace has this article, this essay or talk called "This Is Water," but it's like we don't recognize it because we're swimming in this water, but it's like, it's crazy. This is a fundamental, it's a simple question about like, do you own your data or does your bank, right? And the banks have done a good job of protecting this interest and clouding it. And you can actually go look, I actually think they took it down since I started addressing them, but the Canadian Bankers Association is like the main bankers lobby, and they had a paper on like open banking, and they're like, we're supportive of open banking, and it was half a page of that, and then it was 10 pages of all the shit that could go wrong. And it's like, and like that's what Ottawa listened to, and we need to do a better job of getting in front of Ottawa and counterbalancing it, but this is a solved problem technically. It's a solved problem philosophically. We haven't got it done. It's been 10 years.
Yeah. I want to pivot to some of those big questions, but maybe on the way there, I think probably some people in this room, and I'm just curious myself about your philosophy to building a business, building a finance company in this environment, in Canada, at a time like this. I mean, how do you go about doing that?
Well, I mean, I think my philosophy, my philosophy on maybe life and building is like, and so KOHO might not work, and I'm okay with that, and I'm at peace with it. I think increasingly it seems like it will, but the variable of that you get to control in your career is like, are you proud of the work, and do you care about the people you do it with? And it's like you can succeed or fail for a lot of reasons, which are good or bad, which are in your control or out of your control. And this idea that we could both build a business which would be large and valuable, and that could theoretically also bend the curve for millions of Canadians and like reset financial standards in the country, seemed like a worthwhile bet to take. And that remains true today. It's like all the people, there's some folks here from KOHO are here by and large because they think that we have an opportunity to bend the curve for millions of Canadians. And so, my philosophy is fundamentally that, which is like we just kind of continue to get to readdress that problem. And as we get better, hopefully we are refining our ways to do that in like higher and higher fidelity in what that means. But, yeah.
Something I saw you say on social media relatively recently is like the only way we can win is to play, the only way we can win is to play the long game with our users.
Yeah.
Say some more about what you meant by that.
Yeah, I mean, so the banks are 2 orders of magnitude bigger than us. And so if we come out and we do all the same things as the banks, we will lose. And so it really forces some actually nice clarity into the company insofar as the only way that we can outcompete them, we can't outspend them, we can't outbranch them, we can't whatever. You just have to win on product value. Like you only win when people choose to use you, and they choose when they're buying something, they take your card out. When they're getting a deposit account, they choose you. And so that forces you through necessity to think very long term about user trust and all these other kinds of things. And so one thing that we like, people will, the trust question is one we get a lot, and it's, RBC. And RBC is like an incredible institution. Any business which has been around for 140, 150 years, I have immense respect for. And people will trust RBC to be here tomorrow in ways that they do not trust KOHO, and we accept that. The trust that we want to occupy, which is both in our interest and hopefully in our users, is that whenever we bring a next product to them, they don't have to do the mental math of being like, is this a good product or not? And one of the heuristics that we try and run for everything that we launch is, would we be proud to recommend this to somebody we cared about? And it's like both, I think if we got into payday lending tomorrow, like half of KOHO would quit because they don't want to do that. But I also think like it's the only way that we can outcompete these folks at scale just because they're so much bigger than us.
Mm. All right. So I mentioned off the top that a few things have happened since you and I last did one of these. Yeah. My God, like it's difficult to write about the moment we're in right now because you could write 10 different things every day. Of all the things that are going on right now, geopolitics, technological disruption, climate change. I mean, sort of where you got your start trying to help with the green revolution, inequality, all these things. What do you spend most of your time thinking about, or what is there one of those things? I suppose someone in your position has to confront them all simultaneously, but is there one that sort of you find yourself thinking about more than the others?
Yeah, and it's a hard answer, and you and I were talking about this a little bit before, but because it's soft and squishy, but I really do think about the culture of Canada a lot. And I think there's like kind of two primary threads that we could pull. And one of them is I think if you, I broadly think civilization and economic prosperity are total outliers and total miracles. And I broadly think that the future is the one that we build and the one that we earn. And I don't think we've done a good job of socializing that in Canada. I think like the West and its ideas are complete aberrations historically. Like the idea that you can empirically get better at things while openly criticizing things is broadly the foundation of progress. And I think that we've like been entirely too masochistic in the West about how incredible Canada is. And then I think part of the reason that I think that's important is because I think then we get to protect it and we understand that like, oh, economic prosperity is like not, it takes work, right? It is not inevitable by any stretch. And I think that we have done a bad job. And you can see it, it's like, it's really hard to get things done in Canada. And it's really hard to get the minerals, get the lithium out of the ground so that you can build EVs or whatever. And then we wonder why like our plants are shutting down, you know? Or because it's like a burrowing owl, whatever, you know? And it's like, I'm an environmentalist, I get it, but broadly I think we should worry about like human rights and economic prosperity, and that's kind of it.
Why do you think that happened? Why didn't that culture sort of sink in Canada, or hasn't it?
Like, I mean, it happens. This happened in like this happened when in the Roman Empire. It happened in the Greek Empire. But you get to this kind of like leisure class, and as these empires mature and as they get stable, and these egalitarian ideas, which are good and important, tend to become louder and louder voices, and the state tends to become bigger and bigger and does a cruder and cruder job of representing. This is like grossly oversimplistic, but does a cruder and cruder job of representing those things. So in Canada, I know we're out, but like one of the things that is, a lot of folks aren't aware of this, but like 33% of Canadians are employed by a union of some kind. If you look at the Canada Post disruption, which is now happening again for the second time, the actual, like, so the percentage of people who actually go and vote for those labor strikes are actually an astonishingly small number of people. And they are bringing small businesses to their knees, right? Billions of dollars of damages by like a few thousand people. And I have the math, like I know. And so I think that we have put these well-intentioned things in place. But these stakeholders have gotten very, very big and very, very powerful. And frankly, like it's kind of like the tail wagging the dog. And it's making it really hard to have economic prosperity. And you can pick any vertical you want, housing, medical, where the wait times are very long. You know what I mean? Like, and I think that if we don't start to like cut through some of these noise, and this is the reason I say cultural, is because this isn't like you can go run a survey and ask people. It's like you just need leaders to say like, we're not going to listen to this very small group of stakeholders because we need to get shit done. And so that's why I'd say that this is like primarily a cultural thread to pull.
Your thinking landed you anywhere on how you change a culture? Like if this is us, I mean, how do we change?
Yeah, so the second side of this cultural thing, I do think is just like Canadian ambition. And I think we tend to like celebrate Toby talks about this, we've talked about this, Toby at Shopify says we have this go for bronze culture, right? And if you look at like AI was broadly invented here, and it was broadly actually invented in this city, okay? Like Jeffrey Hinton, Androj Karpathy, whatever, they all worked here. And you could do the same thing for cell phones and all. Canada has incredible first principles, talent, resources, whatever. And we have, the two answers, I think we need to celebrate ambition much more in this country. I think we need to celebrate economic prosperity much more in this country. I also think that we have been slow, and Jim Basile, I don't know, what the black guy? Basile. Has actually, I think, one of the better thinkers here, but we've done a really bad job of recognizing what a global economy looks like and where market value accrues. Meaning, a lot of our trade policies were designed for I sell you tea and you sell me shoes or whatever, and that's fine. But it's like if you look at the Mag 7 or the NASDAQ, where all of this market value accrues, we are living in like a network state, and so how do you actually keep and house that IP and that technical capital here is like the only kind of thing that matters in terms of like building a strong and prosperous economy. Not the only thing, but it's certainly something that I think we've been not modern on and kind of been asleep at the wheel on.
Okay.
And if, like, we can talk, if you look at Shred largely goes to subsidizing U.S. companies for IP that lives elsewhere that isn't developed, and it's like it's $4 billion a year,
Yeah. Do you use Shred? Is that something that
No, it was too hard. And we like lost eligibility quickly because we had US investors and all these other kinds of things. But it's like we stopped using, I think in total we've claimed $30,000 in Shred in like our first year.
No, that's stunning. I mean, like that program's supposed to help.
We should be a poster
like
child for Shred, but and even in Shred there's like a whole sea of consultants to help you navigate Shred.
Yeah.
I've talked to some of the folks about this, but the incentive of this Shred thing is basically to like not embarrass yourself versus actually just deploying capital into winners that help.
Wow. Okay. That'll be a good anecdote in the column down the road. Thanks, Dan. We're getting close to that moment where I said I'd open the floor to questions. So if anybody has some questions for Dan, wants to start putting up their hands, might be somebody around with a microphone. Gary's over there. Are there any questions at this stage? Because I've got dozens, so I can keep going, but I really want to share the opportunity with you guys if you want to ask Dan anything. Not yet? Okay. Let's talk about AI until somebody puts up their hand. You want to start big or you want to go start macro or micro? Because I'm curious about just your general impressions about how AI is affecting the economy, affecting society, but also how you're using it at KOHO. So which way do you want to go first?
Well, we can talk high level at KOHO and then economy as well.
Let's start with KOHO and then we'll see where the conversation goes.
So broadly, we've kind of like about half of 60% of KOHO's salary goes to software developers. Okay, we spend on the order of $20-25 million a year on that. The 3 to 5x productivity things is true with the right developers and the right conditions. And so when we look at AI just from a very concrete lens, and this is just the salary, you're like, okay, that's $150 million a year AI opportunity. We spend a lot of time on the comms with the team, like the company, because I think we recognize that while this is we are going this way and people need to get on board, people in their vocation are more than just we're not economic maximalists insofar as we write code or we do the things that we do more than just to make money. We do it because we care about the art or the craft or all those other kinds of things. And so we have tried to bring folks along for it under the auspice of being look, forget how you feel about AI. X change is happening in the world. Are you in your career going to be somebody who embraces that change and leans into it, or are you going to resist it? It doesn't matter how you feel about AI. It's just there's this new thing, and are you understanding it and open to it? And so we put in a lot of telemetry around this to understand how much more productive it makes folks. We have a full-time team that just does basically developer enablement on this, and we see it. We have developers. This is a bit technical, but in the past, a developer might do 2 to 4 PRs a week, which means pushing code to production or production-ready environment. We have folks who are doing 20 PRs a week now, and that just did not exist before. And so that is real, but bringing folks along for the journey is challenging. That's that lens on it, and then that's where we spent all our time, just because the size of the pie is so big. It fundamentally is not. I think looking at AI through a headcount reduction lens is just not how great companies are built. It's you put in $1 and you get X out is just capital allocation. And so it's more just what more can we do and how much faster can we go and all this other kind of stuff. That we've spent all our time on the developers, and then for non-developer folks, we give them a lot of autonomy to figure it out, but they all use it and they are all expected to use it in their own roles. And then I probably have 2 to 3 calls a week with different CEOs of all different company sizes and stages to just understand how they're using. It's the wilderness. We're all figuring it out together. It's actually a really fun time to build companies because the past 15 years was pretty linear, SaaS, boring kind of. And now it's just a much more dynamic environment because the ground is shifting. So
how do you use it?
I use it a lot for I use it a lot for research. I use it a lot for synthesis. I think one of the sleeper opportunities. So I've built. It's very tactical. I built Chrome extensions because that redirect me so that I have a tendency to go on Twitter when I'm bored, right? It redirects me or play chess or something.
Yes, you do, Dan.
Yeah, I know. For better or worse.
Keep doing it. Keep doing it.
It redirects me to my task list, things I want to do. I've toggled little stuff like that. I actually think one of the most interesting things, and I've built a V1 of this. One of the most interesting things about AI is I think we have a surprisingly little amount of information about what happens in a company on a day-to-day basis, and you theoretically should have this ambient level of information for every PR that's shipped, everything that's moving, everything that's behind, everything that's ahead. All of these things are happening in when people type stuff out, and so I do think there's this idea of we track everything at KOHO now, particularly as a remote-first company. And I think we can get a lot better, and this is, I think, the most exciting thing about just perfect information about what's happening in the company, which was almost impossible before.
It's supposed to be this marvelous productivity enhancer,
Yeah.
not unlike the ICT revolution of
Sure.
90s to early 2000s now. Do you see that? Is that happening?
Yes. Yes, under the caveat that I think the adage is true that the future is not equally distributed. And what we found is certain parts of AI, there's 100% limitations. We try and create cultural conditions where people can engage honestly with it and be it's not ready, or this sucks, or this was a hallucination, because those things definitely still happen. But yeah, at its best, so for two reasons, at its best, it is unequivocally true. And if you believe even a very conservative interpretation of the rate of improvement argument, it's still very early days in terms of what this stuff can do.
Is it an answer to Canada's productivity crisis? I mean, what I'm driving at here is just trying to, I don't know, check the hype, or just try to get a sense from you about just how revolutionary this might be.
So it's very hard to predict. So under that caveat, my intuition is, so first, whenever there has been bubbles, Fiverr.com, whatever, bubbles tend to get a bad rap. A lot of people lose capital, a lot of things pop, but actually what you end up being is these things were all directionally right, and it takes a while to manage and optimize the infrastructure, okay? And so I think that the thing that's so interesting about this bubble is that it's largely being funded by the free cash flows of 7 companies. And so you have a much more kind of discrete ability to support this or not support this. And as long as shareholders keep asking for it, I think people are going to keep deploying capital. So I do think it's conceptually true that you could add 1, 2, 3 points to GDP growth in a given year and change everything. What I am actually deeply concerned about is that I don't think enough people are asking about is where does that actual capital accrue? Meaning, who cares if you have 5% of GDP growth if the Mag 7 captures 90% of that? Like, that seems like a very distortive, sort of dystopian outcome, right? It will get a little technical. The thing that is underpinning that question is, like, you put more and more CapEx into these models, you get further and further along the intelligence curve, but you actually probably don't need 2,000 PhDs to solve 90% of the problems, or like 2 million PhDs to solve 90% of the problem. Like, if you're trying to automate a P&L using AI, you don't need this kind of like overblown CapEx and these massive token models and all these other kinds of things, right? And so that tends to be what happens. It's the same thing that happens with chips, where you effectively have like dumber models that are much cheaper to run against more pedestrian problems, and then, you know, maybe you're like sequencing the cancer genome or some cancer on the like outer bounds of the more complex models, or protein folding, or whatever these kind of things are.
Okay, we have a question right across from you. Gary, like 2 seats away.
Hi, thank you for your time. I have a question relating to more the business development side of KOHO. I imagine that you get a lot of applicants, and a portion of those, I'm not sure if that's a number obviously that you're willing to share, but are unqualified or unsuitable for KOHO. How do you plan on, as say when you acquire your banking license, capturing a larger portion of the market whether through products or other vertical integration? Any other plans that you're willing to share for taking a bigger piece of the pie for the future of KOHO?
Yeah. So if you think about KOHO when we initially started, we were, I would say, like a very, so we had, this is how janky KOHO's first launch was. We had like a white minimalist card that we thought was going to be sleek and cool. We didn't even have a chip on it. And so people kept thinking our first card was a hotel key. Like, that's how janky our first version was. And then, but notionally over time, you are more and more relevant to a larger and larger set of the population. And then within that set of the population, you can do more and more of the things with them. You get, like, cross-sell really matters in banking, right? And so if we take like a recent example, we launched remittance this year, okay? KOHO's unit economics are really good today. And so when we launch remittance, we actually don't care about, we're actually losing 20, 30 grand a month on remittance. Because we don't actually, like, if you think about folks who are using, and these are great companies, but like if you're a pure remittance company, you have to acquire a user, get the CAC to get that user, and then you have to make all your money off remittance. We don't actually care about making money off remittance because we just want you to spend with us or do other stuff, or we're willing to take a loss on you while eventually, in next year when we launch equities or something like that, that you put your equities with us. And so it's actually not about any specific product. It's about a high velocity product organization where we are more and more relevant to broader and broader sets of the population with basically a fixed cost against all those things where we have a lot of pricing power. So that's like philosophically how we think about it. But broadly, you can think about it as like the folks that we think we can help the most are the folks who are living paycheck to paycheck today. That's 53% of the country, to be clear, and I think it's really hard for banks to monetize those folks the right way just because their cost structure is so different. But we are going to start moving up market, credit cards that we think are going to be really competitive, equities, some of these other kinds of things. So yeah, that's kind of how we think about it.
I have a question for Dan, so I guess just wait 1 second because he mentioned something there I want to pick up on. Remittances is one of your newer products. Mm-hmm. Why remittances? What did you see there? What's the opportunity?
Yeah, I mean, 50% of people under 34 have sent a remittance in the last year, right? When you're new to country, it tends to be a big part of the equation that you do, and it's just like an area that we felt that I think when we did this survey and talked to a bunch of our users, like 30% of them were sending remittances. Now, it turns out remittance is actually a really hard business, and we haven't totally figured it out, and there's a lot of edge casey stuff, and but I think the theory is true anyway. But yeah, it's just when you think about basically, once you're 50 years old and you have a mortgage and 2 lines of credit and a car, like your switching cost is really high. You know what I mean? And so what we're trying to do is like have the average KOHO user's 30. That's about right. They have a paycheck, couple rent check, whatever. They have a fairly simple financial life, and then we get to grow with them. Our view is it takes a generation to build a great fintech business, and you can look at the prior generations like Charles Schwab, and it takes 25 years. But that's when we talk about playing the long game. We think it takes 25 years to build a monster. Have
you done anything to make yourself competitive in that space? I mean, it's a classic for how the global financial system is broken. Yeah. Have you done anything in particular to try to make that easier for people, or have you just decided to go in there because you want to get people in early?
Beyond the rate itself, no, we went with a partner, and like just to be candid, one of the things that I think we were maybe a little bit early on, because I think it's like purely kind of a commodity, how fast, how much type of game in remittance, right? Mm-hmm. And there is like UX things that you can do, but ultimately how fast, how much matters. I do think stablecoins is actually going to be quite disruptive here. Our costs right now are close enough that it's hard to justify taking it out. But yeah, like no, it's like it's a partnership that we did. It's a white label, and almost all the transactions land within 30 minutes. And I think we're the lowest cost provider in the country of like 5 of 7 main corridors. So I think it's a good offering. But it's kind of a spider web of 190 countries and all that kind of stuff. It's tough.
All right, thanks. Sorry, forgive me.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks for taking my question. Very inspiring story, and I like your socks. So
good. They're
very cool.
They're Harry Potter.
Very modern. Yes. So you mentioned about low cost.
Mm-hmm.
How, as a CEO and founder, how are you going to manage this balancing act between low cost and good quality services?
Yeah.
Like, how do you envision doing that?
Yeah, really good question. So there's probably some like philosophical components and some telemetry components. I think all the best teams are 10 to 20% too small. And that kind of forces a creative constraint into the system and forces the right priorities into the system. I think most companies, and this, KOHO from a revenue per FTE folk is like creeping up to almost $1 million in that realm. And I think I think you want to have teams that are too small. I think you want to consistently couch things in the mission. And I actually think the Walmart folks are incredible at this, and Sam Walton's autobiography is incredible. But like when we add another team, let's just say we make $100 per user per year, right, in margin. If we want to add somebody, it means we got to add 1,000 more users just for that one employee, right? And fully like engaged and monetized users. And so I think that our ability to be technical and our ability to create these teams that are too small and then force the right constraints into the system is like the right way to do it. But you have to have cultural conditions where people can put their hand up and say, if I do A, I can't do B, right? And then what actually matters is you have error correction in your system such that when your teams are too small and you're letting things drop, you have either the telemetry or the culture where folks can put their hand up, and then you can make appropriate headcount decisions. Like when we said we try and be really disciplined in headcount, that doesn't mean that our headcount is flat. It just means that headcount is often a lazy response to like real problems in an organization. And I think by and large, people tend to look at a lot of problems through like a process lens, and it very much like it's a cultural lens. Meaning, would you really need this headcount if this was your best? Like one of the heuristics I asked is, if this was your best team, would you still have to put this process in place or this new headcount in place? And the answer is very often no, right? And so it's like much more comes back to this cultural thing than a process thing.
10-minute mark, 10 minutes left. I got a question out here. And then Gary, there's
Norm.
another one over here
Nice to see ya.
on this side of the room.
Hey, good to see you too. Touching maybe on all the efficiency you're seeing in engineering and then also the pressures you're going to be under as a regulated bank.
Yeah.
How do you think about buy versus build versus leasing your tech stack?
Yeah, I actually think about it, it's important because there is a learning curve if you're going to go build, you know what I mean? And OSFI will have a different level of scrutiny, rightly or wrongly. But I actually think the lens is just like explainability, meaning when we're talking about like a credit model, and if you're going to do like hardcore machine learning against that, that's all well and good, and if the model performs, that's all. But if OSFI doesn't understand it, then like you're in a tough spot, you know. And so what we've tried to keep close to these teams, and we got some of these folks here today, is like, yeah, these are all basically. My view is that basically everybody can be technical at this point, but the hurdle rate to being technical is going to zero, right? So we can build a lot of stuff which historically did not make sense. But you have to have folks who have an explainability dimension, such that you can bring OSFI and the board and myself and all these other folks along. So, thanks.
Hi, Kevin and Daniel. Thanks so much for your time. The main question I have is in regards to regulatory compliance and how, when you become a Schedule I bank, the cost of kind of saying, hey, we're going to take on this responsibility versus the trade-off, what you were discussing earlier. And like, how do you see AI kind of helping with that in the future as well from like an operational capacity for you? Yeah,
I mean, I think we have to do a good job of building the relationships with OSFI such that we can bring them along for the journey. But there is here's like a very concrete example. We're talking about, so KOHO Bank is a subsidiary of KOHO Tech, and they're different entities. And we did that because we actually want to insulate KOHO Tech from OSFI stuff, by and large, right? If I have to choose between product velocity and a bank license, I will choose product velocity, okay? That said, a lot of, and I think this is actually one of the beautiful things about AI is like, it is like kind of grindy work to produce OSFI compliance reports that theoretically should be automatable. And there's no reason it can't be, right? And so what you actually, I think AI has enormous implications, assuming you do so responsibly and have with the open recognition that AI hallucinates all the time. And I think way more than people think it does. So you have to have like, we're going to AI everything with human in the loops for audit and explainability, right? And you actually have to, part of our OKRs and our SLAs and all that kind of stuff are like auditing the outcomes of the AI generated outputs, because the hallucination thing is real and you like cannot have a runaway train. You can't have a black box, you know?
Getting close to 5 minutes. There's a question at the back. Tal, it's right behind you.
Hi, that was a great session. Thank you for that. Talking about regulations in tech, one of the challenges, at least we always see, is the regulations were often not written for the AI internet world. It was written for very paper, in-person, come to my office, across the seat world.
Yeah.
And so even if you're following the spirit of the law and being fully compliant, at least we face this at Buy Probably all the time. It's like, well, I'm following the spirit, but the letter of the law says, did you meet the person?
Yeah.
Was he across the table from you?
Right.
How do you manage that dichotomy? Because the regulations aren't changing every day, and they're not rewritten every day. And so even if you build for the spirit of the law, you still have a problem. Yeah.
So just between us, regulatory perfection is an illusion, right? Compliance perfection is an illusion. It doesn't exist. So our view of this is, first of all, the spirit and the principle and the ethic is the most important thing. And like there's both good regulation and bad regulation. And by the way, there's like things that regulation don't take a view on that we try and be principled on, right? Like the first thing is just the spirit and the principle of the ethics. From a regulatory perspective, our framework is assuming that we, again, are comfortable ethically, is what is the discoverability of that and what is the opportunity cost to fix it? Meaning, they're like a regulator, assuming that you have and this is why the relationship matters, that's actually almost like the coefficient of all the interactions, right? Is do they trust you as people? Do they know you're a good actor and all that kind of stuff? If you are a good actor, a regulator will, to my knowledge, has never ever in Canada found some shortcoming and said, we're going to fine you or you're getting a cease and desist. It's always a cure period, right? And so our view is we're pretty risk on from a compliance interpretation point of view, with the idea that like also regulators are also humans that are doing their best that recognize some of these regulations were written in 1971 and are not going to apply, you know? So that's kind of our framework is like what's the discoverability and what's the cure and what's the opportunity cost to fix it? Because if they do come in and they say you have to rewrite your entire banking architecture versus like you need to change a few words, we think about those things differently. But I think risk on and principled is like the right posture from a compliance and regulatory perspective.
A few minutes left, so I'm going to take back over the question asking for the last 3 minutes. I have 2 or 3, but I might not get to them all. You referenced stablecoins when we were talking about remittances.
Yeah.
It seems like we should touch on that, especially in this room. How do you thinking about stablecoins? I mean, we don't need to go deep, but just generally speaking, Dan, what's your?
I think stablecoins are maybe. It is like in the historic world, if you wanted to move money from Canada to India, I think on average you're dealing with like 9 counterparties in through SWIFT and all these other kinds of things, right? And so the idea that you can just have a liquidity pool in A and a liquidity pool in B and you can match those things, I think is like super interesting. And I think of all of these things not as any solution to, like, none of these things are panaceas. But what it will do is it will force SWIFT to get more efficient and leaner and more open and more transparent and all these other kinds. So it like creates the right market conditions for moving money from one place to the other. And that's probably true of like all technology. I also think that stablecoins, we looked at this and we actually tried to do it. But like, I think stablecoins have another interesting application. We thought stablecoins had another interesting application where we were like looking at the city of Pittsburgh. And the city of Pittsburgh has like bond yields which reach 7%. And we were like, can we just like can we tokenize the city of Pittsburgh's bond yields and then offer that to customers? Because like 7% on that risk-adjusted rating is like probably pretty good. I don't think the city of Pittsburgh is going bankrupt. But the thing that I struggle with is like, what is the actual token? There's nothing that you can't do in that. Like we can just buy it in the name of KOHO and then just sell Kevin $2,000 of this bond yield. You know what I like? And so in that sense, we're like, I can't figure out what you can do with a stable coin to make illiquid assets liquid, assuming you have liquidity, if that makes sense. And so like the idea of like tokenizing esoteric assets, I struggle with it, and I've talked to some other people who struggle with it, but also people much smarter than me have like invested lots of money in these companies, and so maybe they see something I don't.
Okay. And I think we need to get a vibe check on the economy from you too. I mean, you've thought deeply about where Canada was headed before the election, before Trump's election.
Yeah.
We've come through that, probably teetering on the abyss. I don't want to say the abyss, but we're teetering on the fence between a recession and not.
I think we're
just how are you thinking about things right now?
I think we're in a recession.
Why do you think we're in a recession?
Well, I mean, GDP is contracted 1.7%. So like you're in the strike zone, right? And what I think, if we're honest with ourselves, there's like this acute thing. We are primarily an export-driven country, and there's this acute trade war issue and all that. But the other kind of thing is like, if you don't have a robust economy, you don't really have economic sovereignty. And we can say elbows up all we want. If we're not going to like approve energy construction, or, you know, I live in Vancouver. Site C Dam is $6 billion, now $16 billion, it's late. If you want to build energy projects in BC, you need 25 to 51% First Nations ownership in that project, okay? Like, obviously that distorts the market and creates like all this complexity and like makes it very hard to attract international capital. We just kind of had to, there's this other thing which is just top of mind for me, but there's houses in Richmond right now whose land title is being challenged as a result of like First Nation ownership, right? And this is not like a First Nation thing at all. It's more just like we have to recognize that if we don't focus on economic prosperity, we are going to be a vulnerable country, and now we have this like acute thing which has made us vulnerable. But if you actually just look at like the last 10 years where GDP is per capita is basically flat, okay, like I think we've kind of been there teetering on this for a long time, because we have like a GDP growth which is around on the order of 0.5% a year, while we have been growing our population on the order of 1% a year. So if you actually just normalize for that, and now that we've curbed immigration, you now no longer have a growing populace to prop up your total GDP growth, and so you actually now are like much closer to a reality, and then you have this acute trade war. So yeah, look, I mean, I think we just have to cut through all the noise and be really honest that like the last decade of policy or 25 years of policy have put us in a position where we're not a globally competitive. And you can look at this in the OECD, we're at the bottom 20. We're like, we've talked about this before. We got to give our head a shake if we want to build like. And the reason that I care and I'm so vocal about all this stuff is because I have 2 young kids and they're growing up in this country, and I want them to have the same set of opportunities that we all had. I know we're over time.
We're over time. Let's see. There was a note of hope at the end. So
Always hope.
Always some hope. We will wrap it up there. Thanks everyone for
Thanks everybody
listening.